Can't F with me, he said privately. He also told an associate, the NFL is a mafia. All the owners hate each other. Meanwhile, one veteran owner told ESPN that's not true. All the owners hate Dan. In a statement to ESPN, the Commanders have denied that Snyder has hired any private investigators to track other team owners or that he made these comments. SportsCenter will have much more on this developing story, obviously, after us. But first, we are going to bring in senior writer Seth Wickersham. Seth, thank you so much for joining us. So appreciate you.
Yes.
What more can you tell us?
Well, I think that what Don Van Natta and Tisha Thompson and I were trying to do was answer a question that we've all been asking for a long time. Why is Dan Snyder still the owner of the Washington Commanders? And the people that we zeroed in on were the people who will ultimately decide his fate. 30-some interviews that we did with owners, executives, people who will ultimately decide whether he's able to continue on as the owner of Washington. And I think that what we found was that he has told people that he has information that could blow up the NFL. Of course, he denies saying that, but he has told that to people. And he has told people that he has put private investigators on people, or he's had his law firm do it. And we all know his affinity for private investigators through the congressional report, even though, like you said, he denies that also. And so those are the things we were trying to get into. We were trying to understand where he stands right now with his peers, who are the most important people that he needs right now.
Seth, thank you for being on the show. What kind of information have you received that would indicate the assertions that have been made, or the things that you've learned, the things that you've been told is, penchant for private investigators, the kind of information that he's collected? Yeah. What role is that playing right now in the NFL's willingness or unwillingness, we don't know, to allow him to remain as an owner of one of their franchises?
I think it plays a role. I think that, look, the NFL is kind of about protecting the status quo. I think that a lot of that mentality bleeds into this, but I do think it's a big factor. I mean, owners have been aware that Snyder has said this. He has said it to other owners, actually. And Jerry Jones, we report in the story that he has a file on Jerry Jones that Jerry is aware of. It's his 80th birthday today. Interesting birthday present to receive in our story. But, and, we've talked to people close to Jerry that say that he's lost Jerry. Jerry has told Dan that he doesn't feel like he might be able to support him anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, while Dan denies this, he might be telling the truth, by the way. This might be a bluff. He might be trying to scare people. And so I think that, those dynamics playing out are really interesting right now. But I think that it has a huge effect on owners at the moment, and they're angry about it.
Educate us on specifically what would be required for Daniel Snyder to lose ownership of the Washington football franchise. I only asked that question. We saw it happen to Donald Sterling. He made the mistake that he made, got caught on tape. Adam Silver said he's banned for life, et cetera, et cetera. What would it take for the NFL to do something of that magnitude to Daniel Snyder specifically?
Well, the simplest answer is it takes 24 owners to vote him out, and they could do it for whatever reason they want. Now, they're nervous about doing so, and I'm glad you mentioned Donald Sterling, because owners have mentioned him. Because remember, it wasn't Adam Silver, and it wasn't owners that voted him out. It was his wife removing him from their family trust that did it. And the owners are trying to think about creative ways in lieu of voting out Dan Snyder that they might be able to get the team permanently into the hands of his wife, Tanya, who is vastly more liked and well-respected in that room at the moment. And one of the ways they're thinking about doing it, it's kind of an interesting technical thing. We all know that Dan is stuck in terms of trying to build a stadium in the DC area. And when owners typically try to get stadiums built, they get these things called debt waivers, because there's rules on how much debt they can carry. Owners have talked about denying Dan Snyder debt waivers and denying him loans that the league usually gives to owners building stadiums as a way to try to jam ownership permanently to his wife, Tanya. I don't know if that's actually going to come up, but it's something that they've talked about.
Before Molly chimes in and asks, I got one last question for you. A lot of people believe, especially people connected with these various leagues, that owners regulating owners is simply something that does not work. Particularly with an entity as powerful as the National Football League, it's going to require government intervention. What can you tell us about that as it pertains to Daniel Snyder, especially since, obviously he recently spoke to Capitol Hill.
He did recently speak to Capitol Hill. So did Roger Goodell, which I don't think Roger Goodell was that happy about, having to speak to Congress when Dan Snyder was apparently out on his boat somewhere overseas dodging Congress. Congress has yet to issue its report. The NFL, Mary Jo White, is also investigating Dan Snyder. She's interviewed a lot of people for her report. We'll see if that's public. I don't know what the government can do necessarily outside of releasing what we haven't seen. He testified for 10 hours to Congress. Those transcripts so far have not been released. It'll be curious to see if those things end up coming out and becoming public.
Seth, real quick before we let you go, I know there's NFL owners meetings right here in New York City next week. I was just looking at the dates, the 18th and the 19th here. So what are the next steps on both sides for the owners and for Dan Snyder?
Well, I think for Dan Snyder, he needs to figure out a way to get owners not so upset with him at the moment. And they're very upset with him. And it's something that's been building for a long time. And it's something that we report on. In terms of owners, I don't know if anything's going to happen next week in New York. They might address him, but they've been loath to address him, even in the owners-only sessions, the privileged sessions. They've been loath to bring him up. It happens
more in smaller.
Why do you think
that is?
Well, because number one, Tanya Snyder is often there representing the team, and they feel awkward talking about the state of the team with her there. But I do think that owners are kind of skittish about this, and they talk about it much more in smaller circles than they do even in those sessions.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.